love bread. Some of my favorite memories of meals as a child were meals that were pasta and they were accompanied with a loaf of fresh, crusty bread. Really, it was kind of an excuse to just eat bread for dinner. As I got older, I also developed a love of cooking. In college, I know a lot of my easy math eating classmates thought I was a good cook. However, I thought I could cook just because I could read. I could read a recipe, follow directions, and come up with something that tasted good to me. Naturally, I liked cooking, I liked bread. I tried to make bread by following a recipe, but I ended up with things that tasted more like rocks than the fluffy bread I was hoping for. I didn't give up. I even took a 3-hour baking class in San Francisco. However, I still couldn't produce the results I wanted at home. Still not giving up, I went to Amazon and ordered this book. It's called Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, and it was written by Ken Forkish. Ken is a man who quit his day job after 20 years, and he lived in Paris for a while, learned a lot about bread baking, and now owns a very successful and famous bakery in Oregon. Through this book, I finally realized that a recipe for bread cannot be contained within a single page. In fact, the first third or so of this book is all about tools and techniques before you even start getting to a recipe. Today, I'd like to share with you some of the things that I learned from this book, so you too could bake your own bread at home if you were interested. The first thing you're going to have to do if you're serious about baking bread is making an investment in some equipment. The most important piece of equipment you'll need is a Dutch oven, which is this thing right here, which you will bake your bread in. This is very important because it contains a lid, and the lid traps all the steam that comes out of the bread dough, which creates a crust that is crisp and thin rather than chewy. You will also need a digital food scale. Us Americans are pretty die-hard about measuring out flour by the cupful, but my 2 cups of flour might be a lot different than your 2 cups of flour, depending on how coarsely the flour is ground or how much it is settled in its package. You are also going to want a food-grade container with a lid. This will allow you to watch your dough rise, and the lid will help it not dry out during the rise. Lastly, you're going to want this thing, which is called a proofing basket. It's made out of wicker, and this is what your dough sits in during its second rise. To begin the bread making process, you want to mix your flour and only your water in your container. And this is a period that's called autolyzing the flour. You mix only the flour and water and no salt so that the flour can become completely hydrated. If you add the salt with the mixture, it may reduce the amount of water that can be absorbed by the flour. You let this sit for 20-30 minutes and your flour is autolyzed. After that, you can finally add your yeast and your salt. And then you can begin to fold the bread. You can fold your bread in your container, it'd be a lot easier that way, but for visual purposes, the first thing you want to do is reach into your container, grab about 1/4 of the dough, and pull it and stretch it, but not to the point of breaking. Then you fold it over the lump of dough you have. And then you continue going around each corner of the dough in quarters until you have a tight ball with a seam in the middle. And then you can scoop it up and plop it back in the container, seam side down. And you'll do this 3 or 4 more times, and that's 1 fold. You'll have to fold your bread 2 to 3 times during the first rise. Once your bread has finished rising, you can shape the loaf very similar to how we folded it and place it seam side down in your proofing basket. Proofing in the baking industry is talking about its second rise, where you want the bread dough to contain all the gases possible before the gluten starts breaking down and the bread collapses. To know when your bread is optimally proofed, you do a finger dent test. So you take a well-floured finger and poke your dough. If it comes back slowly and incompletely, then your bread is ready to bake. If it doesn't come back at all, unfortunately you've waited too long and it may not spring up in the oven like you want it to. And if it comes back immediately, you have a bit more time to wait until you bake. Finally, you can stick your bread in the Dutch oven and into the oven, and you want to cook it until it's dark brown. Not so much like some of the blonde loaves that you may see at the grocery store. The dark color gives the crust a richer, more complex flavor, just like for the reason that some people like a crust on their meat. By following all of these steps, I was finally able to get some of the results I wanted. These are pictures of my very own loaves of bread, which I was quite proud of.
Very good.
In conclusion, if you're all interested in learning how to bake really good bread and also pizza, I encourage you to check out this book, Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast. Thanks.
Let's take 2 minutes and evaluate. Sorry. Evaluate a minute speech.